Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first panel discussion in the Elevate Artist series. I'm Ellen Sturm Niz, director of Amos Eno Gallery, a nonprofit artist-run gallery that's been in continuous operation for more than 50 years in New York City. And we're pleased to be hosting this career development series, supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Amos Eno Gallery has 25 member artists from all over the United States, and one of those artists, Julianne Nash, whose solo show Flora Non Grata opens at Amos Eno on June 20th, is monitoring our Q&A feature tonight. There's Julianne. If you have any questions for our panelists, please type them into the Q&A, and we'll reserve time at the end of our session to address as many of your questions as possible. Our goal tonight is to give emerging and mid-career artists real-world advice from the people shaping the art world today, curators, gallerists, editors, and advisors. So let's dive in and introduce our wonderful panelists for tonight. We have Bartholomew F. Bland, Executive Director and Curator, Lehman College Art Gallery, the City University of New York. We have Valerie McKenzie, owner and director of McKenzie Fine Art. Welcome,
Hi.
Valerie. And we have Valentina de Liscia, news editor at Hyperallergic. Bart, I'm going to start with you tonight. When we were chatting last month, you had some great advice about how artists can network better. What are your thoughts and tips on networking, and what do you wish artists understood about professional relationships in the art world?
It was something that sort of came to me, which is we're constantly being told to network, 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 and I don't know that I'm necessarily that good at it myself. I have sort of bursts of sort of social activity where I could sort of rise to the occasion, and then other times where I sort of sink down into a kind of lassitude of like, oh, I can't be bothered. Um, but for the artists, I mean, I've been a curator now for about 30 years, and there's always that dynamic between the curator and the artist, particularly when the artist is essentially wanting something from you. You know, it's sort of look at me, look at my art, tell me my art is wonderful, put me in a show, make me famous, make me a star. Like we all get that there's a kind of dynamic to it. And as someone who doesn't really have that power, but has some degree of, ability to put people into shows, it's interesting that dynamic to have had with artists for the last 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of artists. Most of them have been utterly delightful, but I've also become friendly or friends with, probably several dozen of them over the years. And I was trying to think about what elements sort of lead to that. The first is, I would say, these are very like practical things, like nuts and bolts. If you're going to go to an opening, it probably is not the time to come at the person, with that kind of look in your eyes, that crazed look, like put me in a show and sort of make a beeline across the gallery while the person is in their kind of reveling moment of like, haha, here I've curated this show or I'm put on this show. What people want to hear about at that moment is they want to hear about how great the show they have up is, or how wonderful the artist they're showing is. That's
Right.
not the moment for you to come in and kind of have the equivalent of your slides in your hand, saying, look at this. It just isn't the moment, and you would be surprised how often that happens because people are told to go to openings to network, and you can certainly do that with many of the people there and have interesting conversations. But if your goal is the curator or the gallerist, Valerie may feel differently about this. That's probably not the moment to do it. I think the thing that stands out of all of the artists I've become friendly with is that they don't lead with their own interests. And it's very important for artists to think about making themselves the solution in a lot of these cases, that you have to understand that curators are oftentimes looking for people who fit certain themes, certain criteria. If you're curating a great deal, or if you're an institution where you're kind of constantly cycling, it's sort of a bit like Sisyphus. You've got more shows coming up, more shows. They're always sort of lined up on a runway, and you're trying to slot things in that you need to know happen to make yourself as agreeable and as easy to work with as possible, and to ask a curator who you're, trying to warm up. What are they working on? What are they interested in? And that's really where the idea of like really being there in a group with other artists, the curator may say something to you that may say, "Oh, my friend or acquaintance I know is doing such and such, and let me put you in touch with them, and let me give you this idea for something." And that has worked on me. I mean, sometimes you're being kind of cultivated, for lack of a better word. But it reliably works on me when people say, "Oh, what about this? What about that? You told me at the last time I saw you were working on this kind of show." And I have, here's a couple of ideas. People text me constantly. And as a curator, you can't see everything. So going out and having a set of, many sets of eyes of artists who are working on something or will suggest something to you that they think is interesting is a really powerful tool that I can use as a curator, and that sort of gets a reciprocal relationship going with an artist.
Okay, that's great.
That's a starting place, anyways.
I love that. And for artists who are shy and who are having those moments that you talked about where you're just not feeling like being the most talkative person in the room or going up to someone and trying to make that first connection, if you're shy or new to the scene, how can they get more out of networking events or art fairs?
Hey, lavish compliments, it never fails.
That's true. Everyone likes to
And the other key that I've often, as I've just demonstrated, people want to hear themselves talk. So if you have enough questions lined up, you will invariably become a social hit of the season. That's what I can tell you.
love it. Valerie, in the same vein, you talked about artists approaching you at your gallery and some of the mistakes that they have made. Can you share some of your experiences?
I think I can echo a little bit of what Bart said is an an opening especially is the party for the gallery's artists, but the star of the show is the artist who's having the show. So if you're a visitor, you're supposed to be there celebrating that, not yourself. So um I don't want somebody coming up to me at an opening saying, "Will you look at my work?" What they should be saying is, "I like the show," or if they don't like it, don't say anything. Courtesy, being polite, being gracious go very, very far. And we do have memories, and we remember who was sort of thrusting their smartphone in your face with teeny tiny images of their work. I mean, you pretty much know you never want to work with that person. But it all boils down to everything that's nice in life. Answer your mail, return your phone calls, show up on time for your appointments, and pretty much everything else will fall into place in most situations. Um, in Oh, another thing at openings, don't use that as an opportunity to promote your own upcoming show and hand out postcards. That's not.
That's a real no-no.
Um, in the gallery, when artists I don't know approach me, if I'm on the telephone, that's not the moment to initiate a conversation because I am talking to someone else. But I've had that happen so many times, you wouldn't believe it. Um, when I am in my back room and I'm doing a presentation and it's sort of obvious what's going on, that I'm talking to people, I'm pulling things in and out of flat file drawers, I'm pulling things out of the racks, I'm intent with somebody. Don't come bursting in and say, "Will you look at my work?" But on a more positive side, yeah, networking is really important. Try to go to as many shows as possible. There's lists of openings that you can find online, Zingrex, down to, Thirsty Gallerina that, features openings that serve alcohol. There's all kinds of ways to find out where the openings are and do go and look. And this is probably a different question that we're going to have, but if your work isn't appropriate for the gallery that you're approaching, well, then don't approach. I'm not going to have a coup d'etat and say, oh, yes, I want to show figurative photography all of a sudden, although I never have for 23 years.
Right.
Um,
How can,
so it's important to do the research. What kind of gallery is this? What do they show? Will my work make sense? It's just a little bit of research, but with that research, it comes from a place of courtesy
right.
and honesty.
For artists who are seeking gallery representation, what do you think is the best way for them to approach you? Is it email? Is it physical mail sending something? Is it coming up to you at a good time where they're not interrupting? And what should they look for at a gallery to determine if it's a good fit for the work that they do?
Um, Sometimes people come up to me and say, "Are you looking at work?" And sometimes I am open to it. A lot of times, like right now the art world is in a crisis moment because of Trump, and business is very, very off, and people are quite nervous. So this isn't a time when a lot of galleries are looking to expand. Instead, they're looking to focus on the people they already represent. But I've looked at work and made studio visits with people that I've met in the gallery who come in and they're interested in the shows that we put on, and they're interested in the art we show, and they're really engaged with it. And maybe they'll ask me, will you look at this or that? And I'll say yes or no, depending. But it's all like a sort of a natural relationship of courtesy and respect. And uh, again, if my gallery shows abstraction for the most part with a focus toward mostly geometric. I don't show figuration. If you're a figurative artist, it doesn't make sense for you to approach me, no matter how pretty you think the architecture is here. And I've heard a million times, my work would look great in your space. And well, yes, that's why we designed it that way. So work would look good in the space. So, and we hope we try hard to hang the shows well so that I'm glad people can imagine like their own work, but that's not the criteria for joining a gallery.
Right.
So,
Valentina, turning to you, I'm sure the question you get asked more than any other is how can artists get more press and media coverage? So let's start with that. What would you say to emerging and mid-career artists on this topic?
Yeah. First, thanks so much for the intro and for having me. And I'm sorry for making an ungodly amount of noise at the beginning of this call.
No.
I dropped a cup. I'm sorry for that. Anyway, I do get asked this question a lot, and my colleagues do as well. And there isn't one straightforward answer. So I want to answer this question by giving you all, everybody who took the time to be on this panel, my most honest thoughts and something that's actually helpful. I think Bartholomew and Valerie, you did a great job with those questions. And what I don't want to do is make it seem like there is one easy solution, like there is one quick trick so that you can get press, because it doesn't really work that way. But I want to start by at least flagging some of the things that will make your chances of getting coverage very unlikely, right? So these are the kind of no-nos, the things that we see artists or their representatives do. In the case of artists that we call emerging mid-career, as problematic as those terms might be, we might see that they already have, maybe if it's not a gallery, it's another form of kind of representative trying to get in touch with press to secure coverage, whether that's external PR, or maybe the artists are doing that work themselves. It really varies, but either the artist or an intermediary is trying to get in touch with a journalist to secure coverage. And I can't believe I'm even saying this, but we do get some of these emails that don't have visuals attached, right? That don't have images. And we also get emails where the images are impossibly difficult to download. They involve a password, they involve like a giant file. And these are all just practical things that I think seem so obvious, but sometimes we're not thinking when we craft an email, how can I make this as easy as possible for the person on the receiving end of this message to understand what my message is? And that means making good images accessible. That doesn't mean that you have to spend $1 million on a professional photographer, although I totally respect that work. But I mean, you can take good images on a phone, you can take video on a phone. And, I always say, can you describe when you're trying to get a journalist's attention? Can you describe your work or the message of your work or the reason why your exhibition is timely right now in a few words, right? When we receive an email, and I think this goes for everybody in every industry, not just journalists, maybe Valerie and Bartholomew maybe feel the same way. You receive an email with like 7 different attachments, scholarly essays, things that have been written, and it's great, but I think that's what you send once you've already grabbed somebody's attention. And I think as much as maybe it's not kosher to admit, I think part of getting a journalist's attention is a bit playing this game of seduction, right? So how can I grab your eye right now? Speaking personally, I'm a news editor at Hyperallergic, so we have different sections, we have opinions, we publish reviews and criticism, and that's different from what I do. I edit the day-to-day news. Sometimes I edit features that are more reportage and news oriented. But so there is a way to, I think sometimes when artists think of getting press coverage, they're really focused on getting a review of their show. And I think that's great. And I think there is a place for that. And I think it's so valuable, right? You not just for somebody to give you a good review, but for somebody to go and take the time and look at your work and illuminate how it works and how it doesn't work, right? But there is also a way to situate your artwork in the conversation that doesn't involve a straightforward review. So to give you an example, when we're covering current events at Hyperallergic, right? Whether it's a social issue or a topic that's in the news, we're always thinking, how can we tell this story visually? How can we tell this story through a visual lens? I remember when, for example, the Supreme Court overturned abortion rights in this country, right? There was an artist who had been making these abortion rattles, these make noise for abortion rattles, these sculptural items that were brought into a protest setting. And I thought, wow, what a great, I mean, how unfortunate that we have to tell this story, but how great that there's an artist making this work that throws this important question into relief in a way that maybe readers who are looking for straightforward journalism, what we like to say at Hyperallergic, the way we like to think about it, is that visual artwork is a way for people to engage more deeply in a different way, in a way that opens up different forms of thinking. So I really think, and I'm not saying whatever artwork you're making, go make political artwork, because that's what we're interested in this moment. Like, I certainly wouldn't want anybody to make a certain kind of work in order to get coverage or in order to get visibility. But I think when putting your work out there, and maybe this applies to getting different forms of visibility, like exhibitions and gallery representation as well, I think you should be thinking about how it can be situated in this moment. And when you reach out to a journalist, or when your intermediary reaches out to a journalist, they should say, this is why this is important now. I think that is the single-handed most powerful thing that an artist can do.
Okay. Are there certain, obviously, political stories are very in the news right now. Are there other types of stories or practices that tend to be attracting that type of attention, like that Hyperallergic would be looking for right now?
You know, It's hard to answer that question again because we cover so much. And I think Hyperallergic in particular has really prided itself on going outside of the mainstream and not necessarily covering we do cover big names, not necessarily always covering the most well-known artists, but covering artists who are in emerging and mid-career stages across a wide range of disciplines. One thing that I will say is, in line with what Valerie said about if you're approaching a gallery who only, typically shows abstract artists, don't send your portfolio of figurative work. I think something similar applies to reaching out to an editor and knowing who you're reaching out to. So if you're going to make a cold pitch to an editor about your work, and again, this can take different forms. Sometimes the artist might do it directly. Hey, I have this show going on at this gallery. Here's why I think it should be covered now. Look at what that editor has covered before, right?
Mhm.
So, for instance, I have historically covered a lot of Latin American, Latinx artists. If you see that my portfolio has focused on this, that might be a good hook to reach out and get in touch and find a point in common. And I think Bartholomew also touched on this idea of creating a conversation, creating a dialogue, something that's stimulating before just look at my work.
Right.
Um, I feel I can go on and on, Ellen, but I feel like for time's sake, feel free to cut me off.
No, that's great. The other question, while we're on this topic, is how far in advance should an artist begin outreach to press and critics for coverage? What is your lead time generally? And like, let's say someone was going to have a solo show or a piece in a group show coming up. Um, Obviously you have online stories and print and all kinds of things going on, but how far in advance does an editor need to have an artist on their radar?
I think it varies. One thing I'll say is in the case of Hyperallergic, because we are so focused on reaching our community, we like to cover exhibitions while they're still up. So sometimes we'll get an email from an artist or from a gallery that says, the exhibition closes in 2 weeks, make sure you see it. And it's at that point very difficult for us to find a writer, find an editor who can then edit that review or that report. The more time you give us, the better and easier it is to plan. And when I say more time, not a year, right? Not so much time, but a reasonable amount of time, a couple of months, 2 or 3 months is great. A month can sometimes work. And it's it also ties into what I said earlier about making sure that when you do reach out with enough time, you also reach out with a snippet of what that's going to be. Often, I can't tell you how often, I will get an email from an artist, a gallery, an institution, a museum about an exhibition. They're like, we're still hanging the works though. So, but more or less this is what it will look like. And it's very hard as a visual person. I'm a visual person, so are most of my colleagues, and we're a visual arts publication. It's really hard to kind of imagine what that's going to look like. And we're a visual arts magazine. We make a lot of decisions on what to cover based on what things look like. Um, that doesn't mean that there isn't room for like conceptual art and things that are less immediately visually impactful. But when you do reach out, tell the story. Make sure you are telling a compelling story and that there's a visual storytelling element that grabs the attention, whether that's, we don't have photos yet, but here's a painting or a sculpture that I think is representative, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Valerie, in your role running a commercial gallery, what have you found to be effective when trying to publicize a show or get press or reviews for your artists?
I guess it starts with the press release. I keep it at a page. I find that most people don't want to read further. I'll reveal a secret. My husband edits every press release I write. He teaches engineering, and he's coming at the text completely from like a reader's point of view rather than somebody in the art world, somebody who's very familiar with the work. He will clean up the language for me, make sure my tenses are all agreeing, but just make it so that it's of interest to everyone who could read it. So uh, we send out our e-blasts a week to 10 days before the show opens, but we announce the show on Instagram and also on our website and word of mouth, sometimes new e-blast newsletters. We take a lot of care when we're setting up our e-blast to, like Valentina's saying, tell the story about this artist's work as succinctly but as beautifully and engagingly as possible. And we really spend a lot of time like arranging the flow of images and onwards to, even though it's abstraction, it creates a story that we hope is compelling. Um, Instagram is a good tool as well to create buzz and just in general with gallery visitors, asking me what's coming up, let people know verbally. There are, every once in a while, like a writer will come in here and really seem engaged with the work, like in such a genuine way that I'll say to them, would you consider writing a review? It's worked a few times, so I don't do it all the time. I don't want to, I do it when I really feel like this person got it and really felt engaged. And, maybe they'll write the review. And of course, on my end, I'm super helpful supplying all the images and install shots and backup materials immediately. We print postcards. We're one of the last galleries to print postcards. We have modernized to add a QR code to the back, so it'll link to our website. But I do think that people still love that little piece of paper and they put it in their bag and then they look at it or put it on the refrigerator, and it keeps things in mind. I wish I had the budget to take out ads. I don't, so I don't. But I try to, when a writer comes in here, I pay attention to them and I talk to them, and I'm not like all over them, but I do try to engage them and make them feel that they want to review the show. And you know,
Over the years, have there been writers or press people that you've developed relationships with? And if so, how?
it's just like any kind of relationship, just engaging, um, talk about the work, uh, realize when they want to be left alone. Uh, the show I have up right now, D'Amboisine, has gotten a huge amount of press over the years. Uh, he's been reviewed by John Yao, for example, who's in China right now, so he hasn't been able to see the show. But over the years, I've developed a really nice rapport with John, and I know a lot of artists who are also writers, and so just keep those relationships friendly, warm, honest, and nobody likes to be pestered to death, so I try not to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Can
Um,
I ask Valerie a follow-up question? It's sort of circling back because I was looking at one of the comments we got, which is I think we were both sort of emphatic about what not to do, like in terms of not approaching people and at their openings, et cetera, et cetera. But when are you most likely to be sort of receptive to that? Is it on a rainy Tuesday at the gallery when there's no one around? Honestly, and I never really know the answer to this. If you're an artist, is it better to go? You were mentioning, like, is it better to go to the openings or is it better to trail around these places and things that you're interested in when it's not an opening and you might have more of an opening with the either it's the receptionist at the front desk or the assistant or you
I'm the
strike up a
receptionist.
conversation? Like what? What is the answer to that?
Um, At an opening, I have to keep my eyes on things. I have to see who's coming and going. I have to make sure that people aren't touching the artworks. I have to grab a roll of paper towels if somebody's spilled. It's not the moment that I can meet somebody brand new and have an engaging conversation. So the better time, I think an opening is good for an artist to come, see their friends, talk to each other. What shows have you seen? What are you going to go to? Oh, I have a new body of work. Would you like to come over for a studio visit? I think artists engaging studio visits with one another is super important because you never know who knows about a show that could be appropriate. But for approaching me, probably during the week when it's a little quieter. And
And is it better to send an email? Because I will tell you, from my end, I get probably 50 emails a week uh,
wow,
of people, being interested
this
between
is because
30
you
to
do these great group shows.
yeah. Well, no,
Everybody wants to be in them.
no, I don't think that's true. But I think that it's one of the byproducts of digital media, and I'm old enough to remember this sort of in the old days when you had to, make the effort of spending hundreds of dollars on slides that you were going to
Right.
send to people, you were going to be much more strategic because you had, the time and money involved in it of sending it to maybe a dozen people that you really thought were going to be able to do something for you or that you were going to be in alignment with. Now everything is blasted out to everyone, and I think we're all familiar with this problem of just weeding through, delete, 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 as fast as you can, and still it's a struggle to keep up. I'm trying to think of my own experience, how things break through. And I think probably I meet more artists at fairs than anything else. And
Hmm.
I imagine when you're doing fairs, you're on the opposite side than I am of sort of strolling around. But that I think is when people are sort of in their booths or the artist is there, I'm more likely to sort of talk to them that way rather than them coming to an opening we might be having or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think, opening is a party and once it gets to be about 7:30, everybody has like two, three drinks in them and it's not the moment any longer for deep conversation and with people swirling around. So for me, engaging long conversations about a show, it happens during the week. I'm open on Sundays, so Sundays is also a good day
And
because
of course,
it's sort of quieter. I mean, it's sort of a more even flow day of people kind of trickling in. And yeah,
it sounds like you're both kind of saying that how an artist may be approaching you at a quieter time when you're not as frantic or busy, or when you're at a fair and you're seeing an artist and you're in the mindset of that you are looking for artists, you are looking at art, you're not trying to take care of the nuts and bolts of your actual job, which as we all know is not often. There's a lot of not looking at art and a lot of just logistics that have to be taken care of. That's
yes, but of
probably
course, the catch-22 is when you're looking at art at a fair, they already have a representation, which
exactly
is what so
exactly
many people are trying to, uh,
exactly. And
which is,
if somebody connects with you in some of those like quieter, more appropriate times, and then follows up with what Valentina was saying, like a short, concise message that really like talks about why their art would be great for you or your gallery or an upcoming show, and maybe mentions that conversation that they had about the, how much they enjoyed the show and the conversation that they had with you. So there's a little bit more of a personal connection when you get that cold email.
Yeah, for me, like if I get an email that's obviously a mass email where the salutation is hi, and as you read along, you realize they're sending this to 500 galleries. I just delete those. If somebody addresses me personally, reminds me of where we met and what we talked about, or whatever, and I'm happy to, like Valentina was talking about, I don't want to, some 30 megabyte email that's going to crash my computer, or that I can't open. A link to a website, some attachments, link to the Instagram account. I, I think artists really need to keep up their Instagram, not go crazy, but it's a good way to look at work. And I pretty much, when I'm checking somebody out, whether I know them already or not, I always look at what they've been posting on their Instagram feed for the last 6 months, say, so I can keep up with their most recent work. And just a side thing about Instagram accounts, when an artist only posts their own work and never posts about anyone else, that tells me they aren't thinking about anyone else. So I learned something about an individual when I see what they're also going out to galleries to see, and shows that they liked. And yeah, of course it's a self-promotion tool for artists, but it is also interesting to um, post about other things you liked. And that's a great way to expand your network and tag other people, and you'll meet more people, and then grow your Instagram feed in a way that parallels your own interests. And
Well, Valentina, both of you, one of the facts of the matter is, I think, in the contemporary art world today, is that a lot of the promotion that in the olden days, even 10 years ago, the artist could sort of be kind of set apart or in the ivory tower creating, and the publicity machine was going to do a lot of that work for them. And now it's really on the artist's shoulders, a lot of it, to promote themselves, to have a visible personality, to be making these kind of connections and networking, basically doing PR as a second kind of job. And I think that's very hard for a lot of artists, particularly, and some very fine artists who may, as you pointed out, Ellen, be shy and, maybe a little bit retiring. And there is also a kind of chutzpah to be like, my art is so fabulous and you need to show it
right.
right away. And that doesn't come naturally to a lot of artists. So I think a lot of people are really left in a kind of catch-22 of the very, the exigencies of the art world today. And I was just wondering, Valentina, how, of the news articles you're doing, what is the kind of, at Hyperallergic, what gets the biggest reaction from people? What are the stories that people are following most intently that you mentioned, obviously, the broader political spectrum, but a little bit more narrowly?
Yeah, I mean, God, I have so many things to say. Let me organize my brain for like 1 second. Okay, let me answer your question first, and then I'll jump in with something I wanted to say. What gets the most attention isn't a specific theme or subset or subject or person. It is a compelling story. I know I've said this before. Let me give some examples. Like, I think people have this sense that there is only so much that can be said about a certain period in art history or about a famous artist. And yet people are so fascinated every time we do a deep dive on an art historical movement or, an artist that is very well known, not because they want to just click on the name, but because there's a fascinating story there, right? Like with Hilma af Klint, it's not just that her paintings are beautiful. It is that she was living in a moment where to be the woman that she was, to be the artist that she was, and to have the thoughts and perspectives and positions that she did, and to have the spiritualism that she did, infuse her artwork with a sort of presence and life and urgent meaning. And people can't get enough. And when I say people, by the way, and this is very much like a hyperallergic position, but I think um, I'll say more on that later. I'm not just talking about the art world, right? The capital A art world, the people who maybe read Hyperallergic every morning because they're signed up to all the newsletters, and we love those people, right? The curators, the dealers, the collectors, like the people who are in our community. I'm also talking about the average reader, the person who is a hobbyist, who has an interest in art, who maybe feels that they can't necessarily just go inside a gallery because somehow that world is very exclusive for them. I think when artists think of getting press and getting coverage and visibility, they're often thinking about catching the attention of dealers who can represent them or curators who can put them in a show. And I think we should also be thinking about reaching the wider public, right? Because and then to get into the second part, my colleague Hakeem Bashara, who's a senior managing editor now at Hyperallergic, wrote a piece that went really viral a couple of weeks ago about what he calls the fabricated crisis of art criticism, right? This idea that art criticism is dead, just like painting was once dead, and that there's no room for it, and that it's not really happening, and blah, blah, blah. And his argument was like, it is happening. It's just happening in alternative spaces. It's happening on TikTok sometimes. And like, you might feel however you feel about that. I know how I feel about it. But the reality is that we need to be thinking way outside the box because Bartholomew, like you said, the days of the ivory tower are behind us. The new generation looks different. And earlier, when I said, pitch me your artwork in the context of this moment, I don't just mean pitch me something political, right? It doesn't have to be quote unquote political. It just has to be, it has, I need to understand what the resonance and the importance and the context is right now and why it matters, right? And I get a lot of emails from artists who are like, I'm making work in the lineage of minimalism. And it's like, great, like maybe that's wonderful. Like, that's wonderful. That work can be amazing, but I need to know more about it beyond just, I'm connecting to this thing that happened a long time ago that's famous that we already know. Like, I wanna hear your story and I want to hear your artwork story. And I'm so much more interested in that than in just kind of the name dropping or another thing that drives me crazy is when artists or galleries invite me to see their exhibition and say, it's recently been covered by the New York Times. It's like, well, why are you trying to like get my attention by telling me that another journalist has already covered it, right? Like, there's a certain amount of like pretension to that. And I think, journalists, like, it can be a thankless job. We do it because we love to tell people stories at the end of the day. That's all we want to do. Yeah.
Question for all three of you. Do you think it's ever worth paying for a review or press coverage?
Oh,
No?
Mm.
Bart,
no.
no?
No, I don't think that's, and I think the people who are in the art world, I mean, if you're trying to impress your grandmother, maybe, and say, look, I got this publication or whatever, but no, I think it always comes out. The people who are in the art world, the community that Valentina was mentioning, is going to know instantly that that's what you've done, and it's not really going to get you anywhere. And in fact, sometimes I think it can be very damaging. You're like, oh, it's that kind of artist who's going to have to sort of pay for coverage, and that's not going to work. Um, Valentina, I was really struck by what you were saying about, how when you are getting that story, that sort of compelling story, and that kind of brings me around for our emerging artists. which is the deadly artist statement. And we have an MFA program, a BFA program at Lehman, and I'm always, bantering on to the students about I do not want to hear the opening statement of like, my work explores the intersection between race, class, and gender through a blah, blah, blah. It's like, no one wants to hear it. No one wants to, they want specifics. It's like, I always hated my grandmother because, and now I've ripped up her dresses and put them on. Whatever it is, it's got to be
I love that.
hyper specific. And it's got to have an anecdote. And, it's sort of the same problem of labels. It's sort of like you went to RISD, great, but don't lead with that. It's sort of like talking about minimalism and but how does this relate to today? So finding that very, very personal voice and making it punchy in the first line, journalism, right, is utterly essential. And I cannot believe how many overly long, overly boring artist statements come across my desk. You just want to say no, 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 no. So think about that. Make it out the first paragraph of a short story you would want to read, and don't make it too long. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally echoing that. I think there's some canned phrases that we hear a lot in art writing, and not just artist statements, okay? Press releases, exhibition reviews, like they're being used everywhere. Like my particular pet peeve is when people are like, my work is somewhere between abstraction and figuration, right? When people say that, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And it tells me that, and this, by the way, like, I think it's a little unfair that artists have to be good at talking about their work. I think it's unfair that that's the reality, but I think it is partly the reality, or somebody representing that artist has to be good at talking about it. And I think when we see those canned phrases, um, my feeling is this there isn't much more to this work besides just trying to make it seem important. And that might not be the case. It might be the case that there's a lot more to the work and it's just being written about in a way that makes it sound generic. I this has happened to me so many times where I receive a press release and I'm like, I can't, this is so uninteresting. But then I see the show and I'm like, this show is so great. And I end up finding connections by like, this might be a hot take, but I love an artist statement. And, especially for like news writing, often we'll cover art and we'll include a quote or an interview with the artist. I'll have one of our reporters, go see a show, but then do an interview because it's not necessarily a piece of criticism that we're writing. It's a news report, it's a public interest story, and people are interested in hearing how and why you made this,
Yeah,
and you
they
don't
are.
have, they are like, they're fascinated. People are fascinated. And again, like not just these ivory tower people, like my fiance is not an art world person, but he is fascinated by artists. He went to an open studios recently and was like, oh my God, I met so many people. They were telling me about how they made their work. And I was like, yeah, it's great, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, I think that is a great point. And I like it sort of echoes what Valerie was saying earlier about having her engineer husband read the press releases and make sure that he understands it. Like we can get very stuck in the artist speak that we're hearing everywhere, and we write or things that don't mean anything in the end. And we get sort of behind the language and not really just telling the story that we want to tell. Um, do you think, Bart, Valerie, Valentina, all three of you, what tends to help an artist get noticed more in the industry, in the community, being in like a high quality group show or producing and having their own solo exhibition?
I guess it depends where you're going to have it. If you're going to be at a group show at MoMA, I thoroughly recommend it. It's kind of a weighted question. I'll tell you, I mean, at Lehman College Art Gallery, it's in our mission. We only do group shows, we do thematic shows. And this comes back to the number of people. who I have said, "Can I have a show?" And I say we only mount group shows, and then they say, "Can I have a show?" And so in that sense, I mean, if you're going to work with a lot of university galleries are like that. They do thematic exhibitions. Um, it might align. One sort of avenue might be to sort of think if you're doing a particular kind of work, who are the other, like survey the field. It's not just who's in the galleries, who is making work that you think is similar to yours or contrasts in an interesting way with the work that you're making, that you can put yourself together as a kind of movement or group, those pattern and decoration artists, or the idea of movements has really gone out of art history. I mean, everyone's supposed to be having their solo vision. Um, but of course that isn't true. There are all kinds of things that if you're going around, you're seeing trends, and if you know that you're part of a trend, or each artist, this is perhaps something that curators do more. But if you're going to look at things with a sharp eye and say, well, I'm painting bowls of pears in a particular kind of way, and there are four or five other people who are sort of commenting on the same thing, it might behoove you to think about yourself as you could offer yourself as a package to a curator or a curator friend that one of you might know. I think that's a much more organic and genuine way of trying to approach with curating your own show, as it were, than to sort of try to pay someone to place you or pay someone to write a review about you. I think that would
I agree. I
a
agree.
more interesting and authentic, to use another buzzword, approach to something like that.
What are your opinions on like an artist doing a self-produced show or the pay-to-play gallery model, vanity galleries? Is there any value to them, or is it a big no-no?
I tell them to slip the check under the door before they. No, I don't think they should be doing that. But there are certain. There used to be several big regional museums in this country that I knew for a fact, were being so basically a commercial gallery could get them a show in a museum setting by underwriting the entire thing and making a donation to the museum. And you would see that sort of on a fairly regular basis, that would be part of their curatorial program. And you would sort of come to recognize it as something where there was definitely a financial incentive. And of course, that's happening all over the place now, as I think those kind of walls are breaking down.
Yeah, Valentina, are there certain galleries that like that you wouldn't cover because of that model?
I don't want to name names.
Yes.
I will say, earlier somebody mentioned like paying for reviews, which I think is a better analogy for me to address. Personally, I cannot tell you how bad of an idea that is. I mean, we don't do pay to play at Hyperallergic. We've never done it. We will never do it. It is such a breach of journalistic ethics, and we just have to hold on to whatever is left of like, principles in the field and in the art world. And I think it's just, I have been contacted by artists who, perhaps not maliciously, but because they didn't know any better, have offered me money or artworks in exchange for a review. It puts us in a very uncomfortable position. We cannot and do not want to say yes to that. And like Valerie said, some galleries may have the budget for ads. Like we definitely, like Hyperallergic sells ads, right? I mean, we need to be supported. So it's not like we don't want the money, like, but it's just for editorial work, like it really does draw this line. And I mean, one thing is when you're paying for coverage, which I guess publications are doing, you are paying for good coverage, right? Positive coverage. So there's no criticality. There's no like actual real engagement with your work. You're basically paying for an ad. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Form
Um,
of advertising, right? That's the
yeah.
yeah.
Um, as the blue chip galleries get bigger and take over and things in New York especially get more expensive, Um, do any of you see the brick and mortar galleries becoming just those large blue chip galleries and smaller galleries transitioning to just being more online presences and platforms like Artsy being more of a factor? Or do you think that smaller galleries will continue to make it in this world?
We're trying. I firmly believe in the brick and mortar system. I firmly believe that you have to see it with your own eyes. Of course, the online is an enticement, but it's always better in real life, and it's always more interesting in the context of a body of work. I really, really believe in it. I do feel like a dinosaur a little bit for my commitment. Rents are, I mean, New York is out of control. And even though there's still lots of empty storefronts post-pandemic, the landlords are crazy. And it is hard, but I just think it's so important. And I mean, this is why, like, for example, when I'm at an art fair, I'm way more interested in a solo presentation than just like the shopping mall version of one of each, of 15 or 20 artists that a gallery might represent. Um, yeah, I just think it's the way to have the breadth and the depth of the experience. For me as well, to like be in the room, look at the work, think about it, think about what I'm seeing, and listen to other people's responses as they go through. You can't do that online. Digital photography flattens everything, and then there's the issue of scale and the issue of people's screens being calibrated in a certain way or not. And yeah,
But a lot of Valerie, I mean, a lot of dealers have told me that they're doing 40, 50, 60% of their business entirely online below a certain price point. And I don't know whether
wow.
it's 10 or $20,000, which for our audience, made up of artists, I wanted to say, and this is a big consideration, I think, for a lot of dealers, is how does the work photograph? Valerie's just mentioned all of the shortcomings of digital reproduction and the why it's problematic in some ways, but it's also ubiquitous. And I think that how your work is going to appear on Instagram or in any of the social media, if it doesn't photograph well, I think you are at a very significant disadvantage if you're thinking about sales and how that work is going to sell, whether it's going to sell through Artsy or any of the online portals. It's really hard. And I was really struck by that. We had a show a couple of years ago with some minimalist pieces in it. I did not curate it. The curator worked on it. I had only seen these works in reproduction. I was like, oh yeah, 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 fine, fine, fine. And I was just dazzled when we got the work to the gallery and I saw it in person. And it sort of was a real sort of comeuppance about, relying on digital reproduction, but also how wide-ranging it is. I mean, sometimes I really get the idea that the gallery as an in-place kind of geographical site is now it's sort of reversed. It's only sort of a mechanism to produce content for online in some really strange way. The number of people who've said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I saw that. You did that." Well, of course, you sort of discover that they didn't actually see the show. They saw, 30 posts about it or something like that, and they sort of feel like they saw it. Sorry, yes, Valentina.
Valentina,
I thought I'd try the raising hand
I love it.
just to see. But I guess my response to that, or my like inclination to respond to that, is when you talk about like 60 or whatever percentage of the business being done online, that's the sales are happening online, but perhaps the initial engagement with the artwork is happening in person, Or
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
take it even
yeah.
further, I'm not even talking about a collector walking into a gallery and seeing a work and then buying it online. I'm even thinking further back to our conversation about how important it is to be in community as an artist. And, like Valerie and you said, to go to the openings. And I think like why I think small galleries are so important and brick and mortar galleries are so important is because they're cool. Like I know gallery like blue chip galleries are great and I understand their place in the ecosystem, but like I really want to go to the small to medium gallery openings because that's where like my cool friends are and I want to mingle with them and chat and then like go to a bar. Like we're human creatures. And I actually think that with the advent of even more technology that infringes on our daily lives, what I crave more than anything is human connection. And I think it's such an important part of what keeps the art world going. Even if somebody ultimately, even if you have like a very important collector buying tons of work via PDF before Art Basel opens, right? Maybe it's a work by an artist who's enmeshed in a community, and that's what adds like a certain allure to the work, right? And I would add also that it's not just going to a gallery opening. There's book readings, there's book launches. You can be part of a movement, an activist group, a group where you're making posters or you're making comics, or maybe you're volunteering at, I don't know, the Printed Matter book fair and you're meeting lots of people that way. And suddenly you're getting into the zine community. And now there's all these layers and dimensions, right? And that can only happen in brick and mortar, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think that's wonderful. Artist talks. It was someone thing, which I think is interesting, and both of you may have a different point of view that I see someone's written in about the sort of artist background and their provenance, and whether we should how much is that going to impact whether you are going to do a review or you're going to consider doing a studio visit with them? Basically, do they have lines and lines on their resume that they've been in this show and that show? And, how important are you going to look at that, weight that versus the images they may send you, for instance?
I look at people's bios and what they list. Sometimes people list things like participation in an art fair as if it was a show, and I sort of discount, that sort of padding. But I do want to see, what their background is, where they were educated, and who they showed with in the past, if it's a sort of simpatico fit with the type of program I have, for example. Ultimately, it is the images and, no, I'm close, sorry. Uh, and photography is important, that it's good quality.
So if you
I
were
know
excited about the images and they didn't have an impressive resume, would that wouldn't
people
just
depend on their age too.
right?
And I tend to find artists through referrals and recommendations and conversations with artists that I represent already, or I'll see something, say, did you see that? What did you think of that? Um, so for me, it's a more organic
Hmm.
kind of uh, procedure. It's uh,
And Valerie, for your
and sometimes you go with your gut, and then you go to the studio and you're disappointed, and so what? So that's an hour of your life you won't get back. Big deal. Um,
and Valerie, for your buyers or collectors, how important is the artist's resume and provenance to them when they're thinking about acquiring a work?
um, Not as important as you would necessarily think. Sometimes I'm telling people, oh, they had a show here and there, and they're in this and that museum, and they're not even listening. And they're yeah. It depends on the collector. It's not as important as I think it is, but of course, I want to have that information at hand for people. We don't put artist bios on our website because then we would just be doing nothing but constant updating. But we do have a news section that we keep up to date. For example, um, shows and reviews and museum acquisitions as they occur, so somebody can go to the website and look through. But I'm always a little bit amazed at how few people. We always have copies of the press release. We always have copies of current reviews, and I'm saying, oh look, we got reviewed here. This is really well written. Take it. No, that's okay. I'll look it up. And they won't. So unfortunately, it's not what it used to be, but certainly for people in the museum world, it's very, very important,
Hmm.
but not necessarily to collectors.
How large of a body of work, when you're looking at an artist or do a studio visit, is there a certain size or of a body of work that makes you feel comfortable wanting to like work with that artist, or going, oh, maybe you're not quite ready yet? What are some of those like green flags that you're this is an artist that you're ready to bring into your gallery?
Well, yeah, you want to be dazzled, to use Bart's phrase. You want to feel just thrilled and excited. Um, if an artist, I don't have that big of a space, so if an artist is only working 6 foot squares, it's not gonna, look so good in my gallery, and there's a limit to what I can show. Um, I tend to prefer all a range of scales. I do think I'm not a big believer in big is better. And I think somebody, if they can make a work really powerful in a small scale, is very important. Um,
Valerie, for the scale, is it sort of like, are you thinking about salability as much as anything else, that you're going to have collectors who might want smaller pieces or one large statement piece, or that you can have a range of price points by having things at different scales? I mean, where does the question of, at a university, I can sort of show anything and I don't have to sort of worry about whether it's going to sell. I'm sort of taking the stuff on loan, and we're not in the business of actually placing these things with
mhm.
collectors. How do you sort of make those determinations, and how do you work with an artist to maybe sort of edge them in a particular thing, or say that this mode of your work is going to be particularly salable? How do you have that conversation with them?
I mean, in terms of economics, a range of scales will likely be more successful. Um, but it really comes down to what am I seeing in the studio? And I can think of a show I had this fall where most of the works were on the larger size, and there was almost nothing small. But I said to the artist, well, there's not going to be that much room to show as many. You know that, right? Because I'm not going to cram them all in. And it was okay. So I I try, I mean, I think the artists are cognizant of it too. And working really big is not something that every artist can do. They have to store it as well. What if it doesn't sell? Then it goes back to the studio after a certain amount of time. Uh, Big panels, big stretchers aren't cheap. So it's not like every artist is gonna, drop 10,000 on like huge, huge canvases and or Simon Lewis and get like giant, beautiful big wood panels. I don't know. It's I try to go to when I go to the studio, I try to go without any big expectations of what I'm going to see, and I do want to be surprised, and I do want to feel like what Valentina was saying, like there's a show here, there's a communication here, and you know that's how we pick.
A lot of artists would love to find a patron or a collector who will support them, you know, from the early stages of their career, helping finance them through, you know, their creative periods and you know, acquire their work and help them just grow and send them off to residencies and things like that. Does that still happen? Are there still patrons who support individual artists as they are working on their body of work? And if so, how can artists find them and connect with them?
Sad to say, those type of collectors who commit to an artist and collect with breadth and depth and commitment are fewer and farther between. A lot of the collectors who did that have aged out. And the pandemic had a bad effect of a certain amount of pause occurring where collectors looked at all their stuff and said, "Oh my God, I've got too much stuff." I remember that also happening in the economic crash of 2008, where a lot of collectors pulled back because they stopped buying for a while, and then they looked around to see what they had, and they said, "Oh my God, I've got so much. I'm gonna go on hiatus for a while." So that kind of, I mean, I love it when collectors are like that and really commit, because they're committing to a larger idea as well. And
But that's
unfortunately, I don't see it quite as much as I used to.
Valerie, do you think that goes against the ethos of like always so many collectors are looking for the next hot thing? And if you're saying you're going to hang in there with one an artist for decades, or you know, that sort of precludes chasing or sort of getting one of each of things that are sort of coming down the
Yeah,
street.
there is that mentality. Yeah, I want one of everything, and the next thing that's hot. Um, there's also been, I'd say in the last 25 years, the role of the art consultant and encouraging, in some instances, collections that are are safe and resaleable.
More about investment than the art itself.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of brand names so that when your friends come over, they can say, "Oh, you've got a blah 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 blah." So there has been a certain, I've got a fly in here, homogenization that's has occurred. I think that's also due to the rise of um, social media,
Mhm.
everything being online, like we're doing. Um,
Valentina, you had something to comment?
A question actually when we're in for both Bart and Valerie and maybe you, Ellen, as well. I am curious, you know, when we talk about a slowdown in the market and we even talk about collectors not being patrons like they used to be, where they would really commit to an artist's career, what are some other ways in which people, not just collectors, but also artists and other members of our ecosystem can support the work you do without, like, in Valerie's case, collecting an artwork, and in Bart's work, like, I guess, like, making a direct financial contribution, right? Because I know, like, for Hyperallergic, it's so meaningful to us when people think about how to support us too. Like, we have a membership. None of our content is paywalled, but the membership is there to support the work that we do, and we really need it. And when people think about that, it means a lot. Or, like, sometimes artists will share an article, they'll like get a review in Hyperallergic, right? They go to Instagram, they screenshot the review, the entire review, and they never link people to like the actual article. So the article just like nobody goes to the website, right? And these are just little tiny things, but it's so meaningful to me when we publish something about an artist and then the artist is like, and the link is in the bio, go to Hyperallergic and read the article because then you're getting us support and community too, you know?
Yeah,
That's
well, whenever we get press and if we, I mean, I got a review a couple of weeks ago. We posted it on Instagram. We provided a link to that. We always do that. Um, and when we e-blast it out, we always provide a link that goes directly back to the publication.
Yeah.
So, we're hoping that it's gonna gain readership
Yeah.
for whatever publication that was, and
I
that we're
wonder,
helping with that.
it totally, but I think these things are so important. That's why I'm curious, like, what are some ways in which you guys feel supported? Like, how do you, and you notice when an artist is supporting your institution, your gallery?
I think that
Well, frequency of visitors, people actually coming and caring, people acknowledging your Instagram posts, staying engaged. Of course, sales are, I mean, I got to feed my landlord. So, that's the bottom line. There's still that funny presumption out there with a lot of people who are sort of maybe marginally visiting the galleries that they presume a gallery owner is independently wealthy. So, excuse me.
Um,
Um,
yeah, that's, I
and
know. You're not, right?
it ain't the truth. No, I mean, you wouldn't do this kind of work, where you literally work 7 days a week and into late hours, um, unless you loved it.
Yeah,
So,
as an artist-run gallery and a nonprofit, we love support from other artists, from anyone in the community who wants to support our artists, coming to the openings, visiting the gallery at any time when we're open, just coming to be engaged with the work, coming to events that we have, whether it's this like a virtual event or an in-person panel or discussion where you can come and actually speak with the artist and while you're standing in front of their work in person. All of those things, engaging with us on social media, signing up for our newsletter, and monetary support. People can make a tax deductible donation, and even $5 can make a huge difference. If enough people give $5 to a nonprofit, it can go a long way to helping just support the operations because it is so expensive to have a physical space in New York City. Or how about you?
well, I was going to say, I think it's, someone said geography is destiny. And it's interesting because our gallery, Lehman College Art Gallery, where I'm the director, is in the North Central Bronx on a beautiful campus. It's the old Hunter campus for Lehman College. And it's really it's a beautiful Marcel Breuer building. And our visitorship is usually drawn when we're not having openings from the immediate area in the Bronx. And there are not a lot of other arts organizations in our area of the Bronx. I mean, people will often say, I'm going to see you and the Bronx Museum at the same time. And I think there's something like 9 subway stops on the 4 between us. It's not that close. And so in many ways, we are an island of visual arts in our area of the Bronx. So a lot of our visitors are not in Tribeca, they're not in Chelsea, they're probably might not even be reading Hyperallergic. And so I feel like on a daily basis, we are interacting with a public that has a casual interest in many instances, but is not necessarily well informed on the sort of major events of what's going on in the art world or what's trending in the art world. Um, and for us to sort of get that kind of commitment from the community is really wonderful. I've been the director for about 9 years, and it's been interesting to see all of the shifts that have happened in the art world. It's made me a little skeptical, particularly in terms of loans, because our mission is to really bring the broader art world to the Bronx and sort of show artists alongside our emerging talents in the Bronx, and sort of trying to sort of make those connections is very important. And to do that, of course, I'm often relying on the kindness of galleries from all over the city or even internationally. And despite all of the talk about social justice and agency, the number of gallerists who sort of have kind of done a double take with me about the Bronx. Where is that? Is our work going to be safe? Who's going to see it? That whole kind of, like, where is the coverage going to be? Is this going to be hip or cool or glamorous in some way? And so I've run into resistance. Just because we're often borrowing works in some very surprising places, which I then turn to online and have, read about their care and commitment in a way that it has sort of caused me to sort of arch an eyebrow sometimes. So I feel very grateful for our Bronx community and the people who support us in the Bronx, who may be, somewhat removed from the downtown art world, but I think are, get a lot out of visiting the gallery and the many viewpoints we can bring in.
Ah, sorry, as we start to get towards seventh, we're almost at 7:30. I wanted to ask each of you if you had to give one piece of advice to an artist who feels sort of stuck in their career and wants to push forward, what would you tell them to give them hope?
To give them hope or to give them advice?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess both.
Okay.
Hmm.
Tough one. Or
Well,
maybe,
I would start with be your own ruthless editor. The word curator has been co-opted to everything from wine to handbags, but I see this over and over and over again with artists, where artists naturally want to explore, they want to do a lot of different range of things, they want to, express all facets of their personality and interest. And I'm always saying, if you're sailing across someone's desk, if you're, dropping into someone's email box, it's sort of what Valentina was saying. You have to be able to bring it down, and that's not only with the artist statement or a message to an editor. It has to be about the work that you show. That it's kind of. I think it's very important to have sort of a suite. Think of your work as that you're going to maybe pitch to someone like Valerie or myself, like a suite of work. Oh, this is what this person is about. This is a dozen things that are sort of thematically related. And it's amazing the number of studio visits I do where people are just sort of pulling things out randomly. Oh, I've got a little of this, I've got a little of that. Do you like this? Do you like that? Like it's a bazaar of some kind. And it's like, no, 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 don't do that. Really kind of focus in. You're only going to have a moment with most art world professionals to, as I said earlier, dazzle them or whatever it is. So really, you have to sort of be kind of your own sort of ruthless editor and say, what is my very best work? What is my most compelling theme? Leave everything else in the back room and just bring it down to something that's digestible that you're going to be known for. And I've worked with a lot of very, very well-known artists who even 40 years on in their career sort of bemoan that fact. I became known for X and I'm sick of that, but now I want to do this. And but they're trying to sort of maintain that continuity and explore something new at the same time, which is a very difficult thing to do. So I would say, I don't know if that's hope, but at least in terms of advice, is be your own critic and editor starting off, and really think about what you want to present.
Valerie, what do you think?
Oh, it's it's a tough time right now. So listen to your inner voice about why you want to be an artist and make that work. Spend the time in the studio. Look at other art. Go to museums. Train your eye. Travel is good too. Don't be a hermit. But, just because things are slow, it doesn't mean that, it's the moment to get drunk all day long. It's, look at work, spend the studio time, just put your nose to the grindstone. That's what we all have to do. You have to imagine Sisyphus happy. So I'm quoting Camus, by the way.
Valentina, how about you?
Um, Gosh, Valerie, you're quoting Camus. I feel like there's nothing else really that I can add to that. I guess in line with what Bart said, which really resonated with me about being your own curator, being your own editor, I think it's important that we all learn to let go of things that aren't working, that are keeping us stuck. I know that times are really hard right now for all of us. But I just from like my personal experience as a writer, sometimes things don't work out. And all writers have had an experience where we've written an article and it gets killed, which is a rather violent slang in, editorial talk for like, we're not publishing the story that we said we were going to publish. It happens to all of us, like, from the newest writers to the most like seasoned, and sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. Sometimes we will edit ourselves and choose. I was supposed to review an exhibition a while back, and I was feeling so stuck on it. I was like, I don't know that I can express what I feel, and I just let it go, And somebody else, another lovely writer who's one of our freelancers, wrote an amazing piece that I ended up editing, and there was a different form of collaboration there, but I was so relieved, and it just wasn't my thing. And I really do think that when we let go of some things that aren't working or that aren't making us feel stuck, we also make room and we pave a path for all the other exciting things, which are always coming. I don't know if that really resonates from a visual arts perspective. Maybe there's a body of work that you're like, but this is so great. Why isn't it resonating with people? Or like, why is this style of art? And then we get into this like resentment and bitterness loop. Now I feel like this is turning into therapy, but if you're like, no one likes the kind of art that I'm making, but it's the world's fault, it's not mine. And it's like, well, maybe put this aside, try something new, then go back to that thing you were doing, give things some oxygen, and it's always good to move things around.
Great, thank you. Um, Julianne, I see we have some questions in the Q&A. Let's go through some of the questions from the audience. If you have any in particular that you want to call out, you can
We
hop on.
did touch on a lot of the questions, but Alex asks an important question about being courted and seduced by an artist and how people can navigate that professional and personal boundary that between a gallerist and an artist.
Can you rephrase that again? I missed something there.
If curators and gallerists want to be courted and seduced, then how do you navigate the professional and personal boundary with that?
Oh, courtesy, listening to others, engage in a genuine conversation. I think it's just like all of your personal interactions and how you deal with everyone you deal with.
A gallerist who I was talking to recently, it said something so basic and simple, it sort of left me stunned, which is she said, I will only work with nice artists. She said, before anything, everyone is culled by personality, before they're sort of determined whether they can enter her group of artists. And I was sort of thinking about the times in the last 30 years. I've sort of experienced kind of artistic temperament in some way, where someone's vision wasn't being fully realized in a particular venue, and how that was sort of taken out on either me or a staff member or someone we were working with. And I remember for years thinking like, oh, well, we had to sort of accept this because maybe you thought the person was a brilliantly talented or a genius in some way. And I think It's just not that the social reckoning that has happened. It's that times are hard, as you've said, Valerie. People are exhausted. And I would say to artists, just be nice. Just be
Yeah,
part of be, the people who work for museums. I mean, I know a lot of artists, they hold the museums particularly, these kind of, city on a hill sort of a thing. But the people who work for them are under intense pressure. The people are being laid off everywhere.
right.
And so I think if you're just nice, if you're part of a curator or a gallerist solution rather than one more problem that they're going
Right.
to deal
Well
with,
said.
that is very, very powerful. Um, and there have been people who I've worked with on projects where, let's say, something goes wrong. Maybe it's a big thing, maybe it's a small thing, but how that person deals with it is entirely going to depend on whether I would want to work with them again. Whether they want to work with me is a different question. But there have been people I've come back to because I thought, all right, that was a really pleasant experience and we can do it again. Someone who's going to, mount up the high horse before you've even begun and I didn't like this and this and this is going to be someone you can smooth things over, you can bring it to a gracious close, but in the back of your mind you're just thinking like I don't need that problem. And that doesn't happen particularly often. I mean, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of artists over the years, and there's a very small handful I could sort of put in that category, but I know who they are, and revenge is a dish best served cold. Yeah, it's just sort of like, well, so I think that's very, very important to keep in mind when you are trying to work with a gallerist or a curator or anyone in the art world. Most people are
Yeah.
pretty nice when you get.
Kindness, professionalism, courtesy, all of those things are really, really important. Ages ago, I did a group show, and I selected a couple of, well, I found this artist because he was recommended to me by someone I represented. So that's how that happened. And, images went back and forth. I selected a couple of things. The artist lived on the West Coast. I opened the box and they had put in two different things. And I thought, oh my goodness, they made a mistake. Maybe it was the wrong shipment. I picked up the phone and called, and the artist said, no, these are my two newest pieces, and I think they're better. So I think these are what you should have for your show. And just that kind of arrogance and thoughtlessness, you know, I would never work with somebody like that again. So, yeah, kindness, courtesy, professionalism, all of those things really matter.
Yeah, and I think as as artists trying to seduce a gallerist or a curator, it is being authentically interested in that person, in what shows they're doing, what work they want to show, and actually liking them as a person. I think it's similar to a job interview where the artist needs to like the curator or gallerist that they want to be working with. And if they don't, that might be a sign they shouldn't actually pursue a relationship with them because they won't like working with that person either. Like it needs to be a relationship that both sides are interested in being part of, and you have to kind of like each other because working with art is an intimate thing, and there are a lot of emotions and feelings and personal relationships involved.
Trust. Trust is so important. And yeah, you have to get along. So, yeah, it's like everything in life. Yeah, who wants to hang around with assholes? So,
Exactly.
yeah,
And I think
Um,
also like putting boundaries is like this person specifically was talking about keeping boundaries. And I just want to say, like, we want to be courted by your work, not by you necessarily. Like,
right.
when I get invited to a gallery dinner or an event in a museum or something, I always like to send in writing an email that says, I'm happy to attend, but my attendance does not guarantee coverage of an exhibition or a project. Is if that's okay with you, then I'd like to RSVP. But I like to be very transparent with my boundaries so that I don't waste anybody's time, and I think that's important too.
I think that's true. It's ultimately about the work. I mean,
Yeah.
I will sort of line item veto people who are I think of as being like they're not going to be a good fit to work with in some way. But ultimately, I'm not going to put someone in a show I'm not enthused about their work, no matter how delightful they
How
are
nice they
as
are.
a person. No? Okay.
Julianne, any other good questions from the audience that we should address?
A lot of people had questions about how many images you should have and like what kind of set of something you should be proposing to a gallery. But also, Cynthia asks a good question of how to submit artwork to a group show or a show at all that is not ready to hang yet, something that requires some more effort that maybe not is fully complete or, something that you're working on like that.
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite got that last part of that question.
Something that's maybe an installation or not quite complete that you
Ah,
can
so like how do you get the
submit it.
publicity photos before?
Yeah, exactly. And how do you, like, if they're going to submit it to a group show at Lehman College Art Gallery and it's not quite,
Compelling details.
they
Yeah.
can send like work in progress images and kind of a compelling statement about it. And in terms of photos, obviously we don't want to overload people's inboxes with large files. So 3 to 5 images, maybe if someone's going to be reaching out via email, and then a link to Instagram and your website with more images so that if the original 3 to 5 you've included peak interest, the curator, gallerist, or news editor can look at more. Does that sound like a
That sounds good. Do you think that people need a website if they've got a good Instagram account? Do you care? Someone asked that. I saw that. I don't. I mean, I used to sort of think like, oh, blah blah blah, but now I'm very neutral about it. I'm perfectly happy to look at people's Instagrams instead of going to a website.
Yeah, Valerie, you said you mostly look at people's Instagrams too. Is that you're
Well,
not?
I look at that in addition to their website. And I mean, I'm finalizing my summer group show right now, very late this year, but so be it. And in several instances, I told the artist what my idea was, what I was looking for, and they sent me a link with examples of, 10 to 15 pieces for me to um, consider. And, I end up picking 2 or 3. So if it's a cold call thing, no, I don't want like a million images. But if I've made a request for something, I do want a bigger range. So I would say 10 to 15 is fine. But again, it depends on the context.
Valerie, if you were going to start working with someone, I mean, else had asked about, if you're going to have a suite of work, how much work, finished work, do they have to have? Because I've seen that derail. There was a wonderful artist that I was working with. She was a very meticulous painter. She had many other jobs. She was very financially hard pressed. And she only produced maybe 3 or 4 paintings a year. And I think she had a lot of trouble with gallerists who knew they could sell them, but there wasn't enough of it. She wasn't producing at a fast enough rate to sort of get taken on in that way. Are you looking for a corpus of work, a sort of minimum number of things that people would have to have?
uh, if it was the situation you're describing and like the 3 pieces they make in a year are just drop dead, and I'd seen earlier work that I also felt the same way, I'd say, okay, let's schedule something for 2 years from now when there is a body of work. But if I'm just making a kind of a general studio visit, somebody I've met, I like, I've seen their work, they've met me, we have mutual connections. Can you come to the studio? I schlep to wherever they are. I want to see more than 3 or 5 pieces. Yeah, I'd like to see, yeah, more, definitely. Because otherwise they could just, direct me to the website, the Instagram page. If I'm going in person, I do want to, I want to see a little bit more, like an hour's worth of, things to look at and talk about. With the hope, of course, that you like the work and you can talk about it for an hour.
Even if you
But
don't like about it, even if you don't like it, you can talk about it for an hour.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You always start with what do you see? And begin at the beginning.
Julianne, any other questions from the audience?
Seems like we've touched on most of the ones that are remaining.
Okay. Then I will ask the panelists the final question that I have, which is, does anyone have a moment from their own career or an artist you've worked with where you saw or experienced a major career leap happen? And can you share what that story was? You don't have to be specific on the artist, but like what happened that made that artist suddenly pop in the way that everyone is hoping to?
Hmm.
It's a tough one. We hear stories about artists who are suddenly like the hot new thing, and we don't know where they came from or how it happened.
No, I remember working about 8 or 9 years ago on a group show, and there was a young African American artist in that show, and the work I had picked was part of a thesis exhibition he had had. And while we had the show up was a summer show. It was up for I think about 3 months. The work sold to some people in Greenwich, and I was like, "Oh, that's very interesting." And then the next fair I went to, people had like stormed in, and there was a red dot next to everything in the gallery before the VIP opening had happened. And so that's very exciting when that happens. But of course, that's not sustainable in a lot of cases, and it's thrilling when you've worked with people and you've seen them. You're like, oh, there they are, there they are, there they are. That's wonderful. But the corollary of all this is we constantly talk about emerging and mid-career artists. There are equal numbers of submerging artists, which I always thought would be a very interesting theme for an exhibition. And I was never going to tell the theme of the exhibition until the artist got there, and I was going to pull it down off the wall. You've been entered into the submerging artists. But that's the truth. I mean, not everyone could be emerging all the time just by sheer laws of the numerical averages of what's going on in the art world. So it's very exciting when it happens, and I'm always very pleased for people. And in the kind of university work that I'm doing, it's nice to see. Um, people start off very modestly and almost sort of timidly calling themselves artists, and then they kind of blow up. And whether it's sustainable, that's always the question.
Mhm.
Valentina, can you think of someone that didn't have a huge career perhaps before being covered in the media or getting a certain show or purchase that then really took off, and what sort of made them stand out? Is there anyone that one of those like hot new artists, and where they came from?
Yes, with caveats. There's an artist whose work I wrote about I guess at the end of last year, whose name is Anastasia Samoilova. She's a Russian American, and she has been making photographs of Florida for a very long time. And they are very uncanny, and they're really like kind of niche, I guess. And then all of a sudden, she had a show at the Met, right? Like,
She was in
but
my show 5 years ago, and it was
yeah,
amazing to see her at the Met. It was gorgeous.
right, right. It was gorgeous. And it was this show where like her images were juxtaposed with Walker Evans photographs. And it was just like, holy shit, like this young artist who like I'm sure I don't know her exhibition history intimately enough to say, but I'm sure that she has had other, but she's not like represented by a major gallery, and suddenly her work was at the Met. And I think there's two things at play. One is that I saw this artist really hustle. Like I saw her at every art fair I covered, and I saw her everywhere, and she like the times that she approached me, she was like, "Oh, hello, like I'm Anastasia." Like she had this demeanor that was just like she seemed interested in other people, genuinely interested. And it's funny because now I'm realizing that the things I'm describing about her are actually the things that Bart and Valerie have said that they kind of look for in artists, right? But she wasn't pushy or anything. She was hustling, but like she was just going places and listening. That's what I mean by hustling, not like, oh, like, no, she was just very genuine. And the other thing is that her work like became really timely. She's photographing places of Florida that are now being literally submerged by climate change. She's making photographs of things that have to maybe do with gun violence, and those things are suddenly in the conversation, and she's been creating this archive of them. And so I think one lesson to take away is that you never know when what you're doing might become like suddenly really urgent. And that's why like archiving is so important.
That's a great example. And she was a great example. I remember she was in a show I did called Alien Nations 2020, which we did at the Coral
There you
Gables
go.
Museum
Nice.
the pandemic. And what I remember is that we were doing, I was interviewing artists and someone dropped out and she jumped in for an hour interview with me online at the last possible second and was absolutely delightful, totally easy to work with, totally flexible. I think we changed the work that was going to be in the show, and she was rolling with all of it. So that's a really great example. Yeah.
Oh, I love that you showed her. That's so cool. Small world.
Small world.
Well, in terms of, big breakouts, I can always think that, well, I mean, dealing with mid-career abstract painters, it tends to, just by the nature of it, be a little bit slower and more gradual. What I care about is seeing from show to show new moves, new investigations, big splashy breakouts. Yeah, sometimes it occurs, with the bright economic moment with lots of sales, coupled with a lot of press happening all at once, and then museum attention and so forth. But I don't think I have a dramatic story. I always hope that every show that I mount with an artist is as good as the last and better, in fact. So it's usually the case. Once in a while, it's not. But for the most part, I feel like it is. So for me, it's, back to that Camus quote, pushing that rock up the hill. So.
Well, I think that is an excellent place to draw our conversation to a close. You can't get any better than a Camus quote. We're almost at 8 o'clock anyway, so that would be the end of our time together. I want to thank you, all of our panelists, Bart, Valerie, Valentina, and to Julianne for her help tonight. And thank you to the audience watching at home. We hope you learned some great information to help you elevate your art career. We have 2 more webinars with other industry experts happening on June 12th and June 19th. And Julianne is going to post links to register to those webinars in the chat. And we also have an in-person networking event at the gallery on June 26th. RSVP is required, and the info will also be in the chat for that. And you can also find out all of the information about this series at amoseno.org/elevate. And if you found tonight's talk helpful, as we mentioned earlier, supporting organizations like Amos Eno Gallery, and other artists and all of the art community in general is always really appreciated. So even a small donation can help us continue offering free programs like this. And Julianne is going to share a donation link in the chat. And I know we have a lot of engaged, talented artists in the audience tonight, and we're always looking for new artists to join our artist-run gallery. If it sounds like you might be interested in that, you can find out more about joining us at amoseno.org/membership. So thank you again, everyone. I hope everyone has a great evening and got some great advice from this talk. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.